Joining us on the line right now is Ed Klein, former editor-in-chief of New York Times Magazine. He's a contributing editor to Vanity Fair and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Unlikable, The Problem with Hillary. Ed, it's good to have you here on Mornings on the Mall. How are you?
Well, thank you. Good to be with you, Brian and Larry.
Okay, listen, I want to start out by talking. We'll get to the debate in a moment. But look, in American politics today, you often hear the people who know a lot about this to say, ultimately, when some people go into the voting booth, it's not the issues. It's about whether or not they like the person. Is this a person I would sit down and have a beer with? Is this a person I would invite to my home to have a meal or to throw some steaks on the barbecue? And I find it very interesting that you have chosen to call your book Unlikable, because you have documented throughout this book many cases where Hillary Clinton has proven herself to be a rather unlikable human being.
Absolutely. And historically, you're absolutely correct. From Ronald Reagan all the way through Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, our presidents have always been the most likable candidate. But here I think we have maybe something new. Last night I think Hillary proved something that we've never seen before, that you don't have to be particularly likable if you can be efficient and effective and electable. And I thought she proved that last night.
You hear stories, Ed Klein, about Hillary Clinton and how she treats the people around her, her closest aides, and even people who aren't necessarily closest to her but on the staff. We've heard stories for decades now about how she starts screaming, just flips off the handle. So this unlikable characteristic that you talk about in the title of your book goes beyond just our impression of her on television. Apparently there are a lot of insiders who are willing to tell you that she's really a tough person to work for. What have you learned?
Well, you're right. There are two Hillary Clintons. The one that you see in public, who is sometimes barely likable, and then there's the Hillary Clinton in private, who is totally unlikable, who screams and screeches at her aides, who recently, for instance, according to sources that I have inside her campaign, was screaming at a low-level aide who was supposed to do some scheduling for her and screwed up, and Hillary was just really ripping her apart. The young girl turned around to walk away, and Hillary lunged at her, grabbed her arm, and twisted it.
Wow.
And it's an example of when she is angry, which is frequently, especially in private, she loses it. They were very concerned, her campaign, that last night that might have happened to her if she felt her back to the wall. But quite frankly, I don't think anyone laid a hand on her most vulnerable trait, which is her character and lack of trustworthiness.
You talk about these reports of anger, and I mean I read a recent report where she was an aide once was telling the story about how she threw her cell phone down during a conversation with her husband, and was often heard to use the F expletive to describe in her conversations with her husband. We've heard about those kinds of stories for years. You have more details of things like that?
I do. In Unlikable, the new book that I just brought out, there are scenes in which Hillary is talking not only to Bill, but to Valerie Jarrett, the president's chief political advisor, and to the president, and just completely loses it. Not only throws things, her phone on the floor, which she does at times, but literally takes her forearm and clears off a desk so that it sends everything flying. She has this tremendous temper that takes physical form. Once she was riding in the back of a Secret Service car when Bill was president, and she threw a briefing book at Bill. He ducked, and it hit the back of the Secret Service agent.
Oh, my gosh.
That's what goes on between them in private.
Wow.
Ed Klein is our guest. His book is Unlikable, The Problem with Hillary Clinton. And I wonder, you just mentioned that none of the other people on the stage last night went after her most vulnerable traits and where she's most vulnerable politically. So Ed Klein, if you were a Democrat running for president last night, or if you were the moderator, Anderson Cooper, what would you have brought up? How would you have confronted the issue during the debate last night? Because Lord knows we didn't see the candidates or the moderator confront much.
I agree. You know, I came away from the debate last night with the impression that there were two major losers. One was Joe Biden, who's been waiting to see if Hillary was vulnerable enough for him to get in, and she certainly didn't look that way last night. But a bigger loser, in my estimation, was the Republican Party and the Republicans, who have been wrong all along about Hillary because they've been obsessed with her emails. They've been predicting to me when I talk to them that she's a cooked goose, fatally wounded, and would never win the nomination. Last night, I think she proved just the opposite. And I think the Republicans now have to reassess their view of Hillary, who is more likely than not to go all the way, get the nomination, and pose a real threat to whoever the Republicans nominate.
So you disagree with? There's a lot of media spin going on right now that suggests that Bernie Sanders may have gotten the best of the debate last night, but you believe that the real victor was Hillary Clinton.
I think Bernie did himself a lot of good. He was all night long, almost without exception, in the Democratic Party's base sweet spot, in the sense that he was taking on the big banks. He was taking on income inequality. He was taking on college tuition, climate change, all the things that the left-wing base of the party loves, and he's been very popular about. He also indicated, with his only maybe slight criticism of Hillary, that in order for the Democrats to win in 2016, they need to be enthusiastic and turn out a large electorate. And that's exactly what he's been doing, getting these huge crowds. Hillary's been getting very sparse crowds, as you know. Mm-hmm. He has the enthusiasm thing going for him. She doesn't. And that's the point he made last night.
Can I ask you, go back to this this temperament thing that you talk about with her, how she, people have to tiptoe around her. One of the things that I always get concerned about is when you have a leader that everybody tiptoes around and nobody wants to talk to or tell the truth because they don't want to get yelled at. Seems like that is a leader that is destined to have problems because nobody will say, no, Madam President, no, Madam Secretary. That would be the wrong thing to do.
Well, you're completely correct about that. The campaign, the Hillary campaign, has been frustrated for months because the professionals in the campaign have been advising her to do one thing, which was to get this email thing once and for all behind her by just bringing it all out at one time, confronting it, and then taking the hit and then moving on. However, her inner circle, and that's Huma Abedin, that's Cheryl Mills, and there are a few others like Mandy Grunwald. They have her ear when the campaign people aren't around. And these are the very people that you're talking about who tell Hillary she's great, she knows what she's doing, that she knows better than her experts. And that's a very serious and dangerous thing for a leader, because a leader should be getting the honest opinion.
Unvarnished, right. Absolutely.
Unvarnished opinion so the leader can make an informed decision. I think Hillary has been making, until last night, uninformed decisions about how to handle herself.
All right, Ed, we're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you so much. The name of the book is called Unlikable, The Problem with Hillary.